Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I'm Zeev Sanderson, Executive Director of NYU Center for Social Media and Politics, an academic institute that works to strengthen democracy by conducting scientific research, advancing evidence-based public policy, and training the next generation of students and scholars. Today is my favorite kind of panel in which I've gotten to invite three of my favorite experts on a topic that I find endlessly fascinating and mostly just listen to them talk about their work. It's also an added bonus that the topic of today's panel, the future of search engines, is sort of the topic of the day given the announcements over the past few days. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. So what exactly are we here to discuss? For all of the public discussion around the impact of social media on people's information diets, and belief formation, there's comparatively less focus on search engines, even though Google is the most visited website in the world. For the last 20 years, search engines have been, for many people, and continue to be, their main entry point into the web. They index information at unimaginable scale and make it accessible at unimaginable speed. I remember quite vividly my parents in the late 90s bringing me into their office and opening up AskJeeves.com on an old iMac G3, telling me with sort of like a childlike wonder to ask it any question at all. And then still today in the US, a majority of internet users report that they check a fact on Google at least once a day, which is sort of an astonishing statistic. In a recent study from myself and co-authors, which I'll share in the chat, found that searching online can have direct effects on people's perceptions of news veracity, increasing belief in both misinformation and true information. But there are also tensions, right? Contradictions and challenges. How can search engines feed people reliable info? How can they support the financial models of publishers to support a robust web? And how can they innovate and adapt to competitive pressures such as generative AI while remaining sort of a stable core part of our digital infrastructure? The complexity of these questions require an all-of-society approach. Academics to produce rigorous and robust research, journalists to produce incisive reporting, and industry experts to think deeply about and tackle these problems at scale. So to this end, we couldn't have a better group of three experts joining us, and I'm really excited for about the 55 minutes that we'll have together, in which we'll cover what we know about search engines to date that have been so fundamental to our lives over the past 2.5 decades, as well as our questions for how these products will sort of change and adapt in the so-called age of AI. So as a brief run of show, I'll introduce each of our esteemed panelists before asking them a few questions about their work. They'll have 7 or so minutes to talk about their work, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for about the last half an hour. And for folks who are joining us in the webinar, please feel free if you have any questions to drop them in the Q&A box below. All right, so let's get started. So I want to focus sort of on the current search landscape. As folks know, companies use a variety of factors to rank results in search, and Google really was a pioneer in the process. Initially called PageRank, an algorithm, and now they've continued to update it in sort of a variety of ways and use a variety of quality and relevance metrics in order to feed us really good information. The goal is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. But this is an incredibly challenging job. Luckily, we have people like Zoe Darme working on these challenges, and we're thrilled to have her here today to talk about her work at Google. At Google, she's Senior Manager of Knowledge Information on the Trust team. And so Zoe, I wonder whether you can take us sort of behind the scenes and talk a little bit about how Google Search has evolved over the years and how the company sort of balances these priorities of needing to innovate while still, working to send people trustworthy information.
Thanks, Zeev. And yeah, happy to talk about that. But shout out to Franchesca, room rater, 10 out of 10. Nice bookshelf. Great job, Franchesca. You're outshining us all in that front. But I'll start by saying that I work on a trust team, as Zeev mentioned, and this sits within our product org. So it's not trust and safety, it's not public policy, it's a specific team that sits closely together with our product and eng teams and focuses really only on trust issues. Now, for me in particular, I work on content issues. So how do we provide reliable and trusted information at scale across the products that really form a part of our everyday experience? So this includes things like search and maps, but not just search and maps. I also help support Lens, our Gemini app, news, all sorts of other types of products. So, but since Steve asked, let me just lift the hood a little bit and explain how search has evolved over the years. So at the risk of aging myself, I was born in 1983. So unlike Gen Z, I remember Ask Jeeves very well and what searching was like back in the day. And recently I asked my stepson, who's 10, do you know what I do for a living? And he said, you write the search results page, which is hilarious, also untrue. I do not, I can confirm on the record, like I do not write the search results page. And, that's not a job. But I thought it was super cute and a funny mental model, as I kind of actually do remember manually curated directories. Times were quaint back then. We had Usenet forums, I had ICQ, Yahoo Chat, I had a Friendster, I had a MySpace, I had not one, but multiple GeoCities fan pages, especially focused on David Duchovny and the X-Files. That was a big thing back in the early days of the internet. And so I think it's really remarkable the way that search has survived um, through all of this evolution and revolution in the way that we interact with our online environment. And one thing to point out is it's not by accident. Search has never been, it will never be static. It's really evolved and it's had to. So just kind of looking back through the years, in 1997, we registered google.com as a domain. In 2000, we reached 1 billion URLs. In 2004, we added local search. In 2006, there was translate and trends. 2012, launched the knowledge graph. 2017, Google Lens. I could go on and on and on. Now, we do still have 10 blue links. And yesterday, Zeev, you mentioned kind of the big day we had at Google for I/O. But yesterday, we one thing that I woke up to and I was reminded of is my friend Danny, our search liaison, tweeted about a new option that'll let you display a version of the search results page that's focused more on web links. So this could be helpful if you've got limited internet access or you just prefer to see text-based results separate from search features. So I'm excited to see 10 blue links making a big comeback along with wide leg jeans and Doc Martens. But at the same time, the search page of 2024 does not look like the search page of 1997, and that's really for good reason. And it's because the way people have searched has changed. In 2015, actually, for the first time, we saw more searches happening on mobile than on desktop. And we're still seeing changes in how people are searching. So one example is they're putting in more conversational queries. So we're not just searching for pizza in Sunnyside anymore. We're searching for vegan pizza in Sunnyside, open late. Or my recent query was pizza place in Queens from the same chefs who used to work at Roberta's. New Yorkers in the house will appreciate Roberta's. And by the way, there are more than one of those. So there's one in Ridgewood called Decades Pizza and another one in Sunnyside called Philomena's. Both very good. I recommend it. But it just shows you kind of like the way that we are interacting with search is different. And it's becoming more conversational. So on top of that, which is really still focused on text-based search, we're also seeing an increase in models that are natively multimodal. So this may eventually change the way that people search across text, image, and video. So another example, sorry, you guys are learning a lot about me. I love the Westminster Kennel Club dog show, but I'm horrible at remembering all the breed names, right? So if I'm in Central Park and seeing like a shaggy looking dog, it's going to be more commonplace for me to whip out my phone, like take a photo of that dog with permission of the dog owner, and type, what kind of dog is this? Throw it into Lens and find out that it's like a Petit Basset Griffon Vendéen. Maybe I can even ask Google how to pronounce that correctly. My French accent is atrocious. So all of this is to say that search evolved in large part due to the changes in how people come to approach their search journeys. But there is a critical part of search that at its core has very much stayed the same and will stay the same, and that's the investment in search quality. I used to work on another search engine. I do, and I have used and I do use multiple different search engines. I think it's really helpful as practice to compare results from one search engine to another. But for me personally, the thing that really keeps me coming back to Google search is because it generally finds me what I'm looking for, both in terms of relevance and in terms of quality. And so when I do this talk in a small group setting, I often ask people to draw on a Post-it, what is your mental model of how search works? You know, we already learned about my 10-year-old's mental model. And often what they'll draw is something like, you know, a search term, then an arrow to a big cloud with a question mark inside, then another arrow, then to just like, you know, a list of results, right? And I think it just goes to show that many people like don't know. Search just does its thing. It's done its thing for years. We don't know how it works. People don't know why it works. It just feels a little bit like magic. But it's not magic. It's a lot of hard work. And so two key parts that I think are important to talk about and break down some of that magic is one, language understanding, and two, page quality. So first, I'm going to talk about language understanding. And this is the part that I think, you know, in my personal opinion, people really underappreciate because it's harder than we think. You know, it's like, oh, Google just knows what I'm talking about. But take, for example, all the different meanings of the query apple. Are we talking about the fruit? Are we talking about the company? Are we talking about Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter? You know, lots of different possible interpretations of that query. Another one would be Mercury. What's the user intent here? Is it the planet? What are all the possible user intents? The planet, the car, the element, you know, and maybe the car was more popular with my family back in the day than now. I have no idea. So, you know, that the meanings kind of change over time as well. So synonyms are really another tough one. And we have had to learn a lot about how language works in order to understand what to do when someone, for example, uses the word change. Does this mean adjust? Does it mean convert? Does it mean exchange? Does it mean install? Does it mean modify, etc.? And so to do a better and better job at query understanding, we are using advances in machine learning. And this does include LLMs. So one example here is BERT, which I wrote this down because I always get it wrong, stands for bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. And that T, transformers, is a type of neural network that Google helped develop and covered in a paper called Attention is All You Need. The T in GPT also stands for transformers. Now, one of the ways we've traditionally tried to understand all these queries is to focus on the words that seem to matter and drop the ones that don't. So a query like, can you get medicine for someone pharmacy? In the language of search engines, we typically used to look for the keywords, and the auxiliary words in between, you know, didn't matter. So these auxiliary words or stop words, we would basically just drop them. And by dropping the words for someone in can you get medicine for someone pharmacy, we were missing the meaning of the query. So we've had to develop a way to find meaning in those previously, you know, meaningless words. And over the last year, as I've mentioned, people are searching more conversationally. And so those auxiliary words really matter a lot. Now, for those of you who are a bit technical, more technical than I am, English PhD dropout, what I'm talking about is a bag of words model. We were drawing out what we thought was important, finding connections between them: medicine, someone, pharmacy. Now we're looking at those words as more of a sequence, which helps understand things in context. So as someone who used to diagram sentences for fun, I really appreciate this approach because it has a profound impact on how we can deliver relevant results. Before, we were returning results about how you can pick up a prescription for yourself, and now we're recognizing this as a query, meaning how can I, Zoe, pick up a script for someone else, like my husband. Now, I said the second thing I was going to talk about is page quality. We're pretty open by what we mean about page quality. We have 160 pages of our search quality rater guidelines out there. And this is what our one of our VPs of search ranking always used to call our North Star or our product spec of search. And that I love thinking about the rater guidelines that way. And we do have a concept called EEAT, And page quality means how well a page achieves its purpose. And to do so, it should be demonstrating experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Now, this does not mean you necessarily have to have that PhD that I never got in order for your pages to demonstrate expertise. So for something like COVID-19 or the flu, you may want expertise to include medical knowledge and credentials. In this case, the WHO or the CDC might be good examples. But for a topic like hair braiding, it's okay to consider everyday expertise, and a beauty blog might be a good and reliable source. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is how the open web is vast. It includes information on every topic imaginable, and some of these topics require different standards for quality than others. So there are those topics that significantly impact the health, financial stability, or safety of people, or the welfare and well-being of society. And we call these topics your money or your life, or YMYL. And we apply very high page quality standards for YMYL topics. But I talked about what we mean by highest quality. What do we mean then by lowest quality? We're also pretty open about what we mean by this, and these include pages that are harmful to yourself or to others, harmful to specified groups, harmfully misleading information, or untrustworthy and spammy. Just a couple of examples. And for those YMYL queries, especially those where there's a higher chance of returning lowest quality results, we can use our systems to dynamically and automatically shift the balance of signals to favor higher quality documents. At scale, no system is going to be 100% perfect. And our goal is to minimize because we can't eliminate all losses, but this is why we think that like a systems approach and proportionality is really critical. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that we do detect 40 billion pieces of spam each day. It's an adversarial space. It requires constant improvements to our ranking systems. So I sped through this. I can and I do give a whole day version of this, but I just wanted to give you some like key highlights about how search works. And Zeev, I can't promise to answer every question about search, but I'll try to do my best. So thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much, Zoe. So yeah, I mean, in many ways, as we mentioned, Google has succeeded in its mission. I mean, I use it, I can't count how many times a day. There's also been accompanied by a number of indirect and direct consequences, things that I know Google has spoken about quite publicly. And Mia Sato has written about really beautifully at The Verge. And so I want to turn things over to Mia to sort of talk about your work. Specifically, you wrote a feature story about how the internet has reshaped itself around Google's algorithms for better and at times for worse. And so I want to sort of open it up to give you some time to talk about your work and explain how the evolution of that process occurred and its impact it's had on sort of both creators of information and consumers of information.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very excited to share my work. So in January of this year, I published a story at The Verge called The Perfect Web Page. And we wanted to cover Google search as a platform for creators, the same way that we might cover Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. All of these platforms have practices that are, sort of best practices that experts suggest or that the platform sometimes suggests. And there's almost like a folklore aspect to how people post on these platforms. There is sort of like, superstitions and beliefs, and sometimes they're founded and sometimes they're not. But there's relatively little coverage of, I think, how Google search works compared to these other platforms in this way. Yet Google is the most important and by far the most consequential for a lot of publishers' bottom lines. So we wanted to apply these reporting practices and this kind of attention to search. And in this piece, we made up a fictional made-up website called Karma Chameleon. It was a pet lizard blog, where we took, sort of a DIY-y, quirky website that was maybe just one person starting it, and then we took it through the evolution of creating it to be optimized for Google. We took it through SEO, search engine optimization practices. We used tools that marketers and writers and publishers use in real life. And we wanted to show how it changed what the site looked like, what it felt like, how it read, and even what might be published on the site. And Sort of we go through these different steps throughout the story that is sort of like an interactive, very beautiful visual elements done also by an artist. And so what we saw and what we showed was that, first kind of the structure of the website changes. So the designs and the themes that are used are, kind of, you start to feel like all sites look the same. They have sort of the same, navigation. Some creators and publishers told me how, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards certain website themes because they're advertised as being the best for SEO or the best for Google performance. And I will say that like a lot of these changes are good. Google has really emphasized and pushed site owners to have accessible, fast websites, and that is an important change for everyone. It's a better user experience. They dissuade certain types of advertising, pop-ups, things like that. So in some ways, like this changes for the good for everyone, I think. But then it kind of moves deeper and deeper into, people end up writing the same because they're targeting keywords. They end up breaking up content the same because they need those headers. They break up paragraphs the same way because the SEO writing tools are saying don't have a paragraph longer than 6 sentences, or these words are too complicated, or whatever it may be. The format for headlines and titles sort of becomes cookie cutter. And I played around with a lot of SEO tools in this way, and it was really interesting to see how, for us and for myself, for my writing, I don't really use them, but what my writing would look like if I followed these practices or followed the guidance of these tools and these experts. And I think, one of the final, and to me, maybe the most consequential and important version of this change happens actually when Google and search end up influencing what kind of content and work is created in the first place. I think there are like big questions that folks are grappling with around human creativity and creation, because Google plays such an important role in keeping the lights on and keeping a publication afloat, that for people working with a small team or a shoestring budget, everything that doesn't serve that purpose is a bad investment. They don't have time to do it. And I spoke with a lot of writers and bloggers and recipe developers or whoever, and they talked about how, the things that they don't feel like they can rank highly for end up going on the back burner. And even though they might feel like they have something better to offer or something different to offer, if they don't think they can outrank the big sites, it's not worth their time. And so I think that's a really significant part of this too, that maybe we is less visible, but is still really important. And the effect for consumers of that information is that we end up seeing a lot of the same things. We end up seeing a lot of the sort of low-hanging fruit, content that might not be the best quality, or isn't bringing anything new to the table, but that they've optimized it in a way that is very beneficial for them. And it also, on sort of a problematic end, it can end up creating a snowball effect where information that is inaccurate or sort of wrong is reproduced because there is search volume and because people are looking for it. And those queries end up sort of informing the content that is created, even when there are issues with what is being presented in the first place. In order, so those website operators are trying to meet that volume and try to rank for them. Separate from the perfect web page piece that I did, I also wrote a piece in February about AI-powered obituary spam. And this is, there's been actually some other really great coverage, and I believe Google has also introduced some updates to the ranking algorithm specifically mentioning this problem. But what was happening was basically website operators were producing a mountain of content, everything from news articles to press releases to fake obituaries about private individuals who had died. And the information was often wrong, offensive, obviously. Sometimes people who were not dead were written about as if they had passed away. And because these were private individuals, there was something called a data void. So there wasn't enough information there, but Google had to serve something. And because of that, these low quality pages were being elevated to the top in the time that people were searching for, John Smith obituary, or, your friend from high school, or a family member that you lost touch with. And the game there was that these sites were producing things according to search terms and search volume, and then they were able to bump to the top of results and collect clicks every time someone clicked in or clicked an ad. I anecdotally, since Google announced some changes specifically targeting this, I have noticed and anecdotally heard kind of there have been shifts in how those pages appear, but I just offer that as an example of the really harmful possibilities and potentials for when people are sort of over SEO-ifying their work.
Thanks so much, Mia. So I want to turn things over next to Franchesca. And Franchesca, I think your work, right, we've sort of talked about these sort of four actors, right? It's information seekers, it's information producers, it's the search engine that's sort of structuring or ordering content for people. And then it's also these other actors who might be sort of using this search environment for particular ends. And your work, in a very rich way, sort of sits at the middle of all of this. Including a wonderful book that I recommend for everyone called The Propagandist Playbook from last year, as well as some more recent work. So I wanted to sort of open things up to you and talk about sort of how your work has triangulated amongst these different actors, and really what you found the impacts are on people looking for information.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, oh shoot, did my internet go out? Let me turn off my Outlook. Okay,
You're
there.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for letting me be in conversation with everyone today, and everyone for joining. I know it's the end of the semester here. It's like nobody's here, zombie apocalypse. So the fact that 86 people have logged on, I think is fantastic. So yeah, I'm Franchesca Trot. I am an assistant professor at the School of Information and Library Science and a principal investigator at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life, or CTAP is what we call ourselves. And for, I would say, like over a decade now, I've been thinking about how do people find news and information that they can trust. And then I supplement this conversation with how the search environment is rapidly changing, and then a lot of amazing theorists. So, I mean, I would say shout out to Safiya Noble, who really kind of shaped a lot of the way that I see my research questions. But basically, what I've been finding in my work, and a lot of what my work thinks about, is how the way people see the world, or what Arlie Hochschild, who's a sociologist, refers to as our deep stories, shape the kinds of inquiries people have. And that this isn't particularly concerning when the information about a subject doesn't really change. So an example I give a lot is like when I'm traveling to Europe and I don't understand meters, I am constantly searching how many meters are in a mile, or like what is this? What is the gallon? What does this mean, right, where I am? And really, it doesn't matter how that information is ordered or presented to us, because it's like static in the sense that there's an equation for that has never really shifted, and so we'll be just fine. But what my work thinks about is like the more precarious searches that we do, and in particular how these intersect with things like public health, as well as democracy, right? Democratic processes. So within this concept of like, how does our worldviews shape our queries? What I also kind of think about are two things: is how are these outcomes or these returns kind of manipulated for corporate and political interests? So we have to remember there are interests behind how information is ordered. And so what are these kind of interests behind the curtain? And then I also really think a lot about kind of the ubiquitous nature of search. So whereas we used to kind of set aside time, right, like you described, Steve, where people are like, oh, let's go on to Ask Jeeves, or you kind of take this moment to think about things. Even, I would say, even this idea of Googling it has almost changed a little bit. And like my kids now say, when we're in a conflict over truth, search it up, Mom, search it up. And for them, it means, and I would say, but back in the day, now I'm dating myself, right? It was like, Google it, right? Even this language has changed. And I think a lot of it is not just what is the primary platform that people are going to, but also just the nature of it. So being mobile, talk to text. Obviously, what Zoe's saying, we're seeing much more conversational like queries. I think it's because people are literally having conversations with their search preferences. So my work thinks a lot about that. And in relation to what Mia was saying, kind of these corroded keywords, and in particular, how nefarious actors will construct keywords very explicitly to connect to those deep stories. And then they spread these narratives in a non-necessarily online environment, right? So talk radio is still a primary way where people get information in the United States, in-person rallies and events. And then there's this distrust of mainstream media where there's this huge emphasis to do your own research. But these research rabbit holes are often highly structured in a way that people don't necessarily understand. So someone might see something on a social network and say, that doesn't seem quite right, or, oh, I should do my research on this subject. But when they search for these highly curated keywords on these concepts, the information returned to them is not particularly great. Now, I know Zoe's team has been doing a lot to think about the role of data voids, and I'd love for us to I feel like data voids is where all of us intersect in many ways. And also kind of one of the Q&As that just got on here in terms of hallucinations. I think, to me, the most pressing concern in an AI-enabled search environment are actually data voids, because it's still unclear how AI-enabled search is being trained. We know there's a very high link between Wikipedia content and Google results, but we don't really know how this is mapping into AI-enabled search. And I think data voids are particularly problematic in AI-enabled search because the environment of results comes in this conversational style where it just seems more trustworthy. And none of those blue links are even available to you, right? They're actually, like, in some platforms explicitly, they will not provide you that link. And so thinking about that, I think would be a really fun way to take this conversation. I don't know if that answered what you were saying, Zeev, but I feel like I was trying to pull us all together in a weird way.
So I actually would, I would
book.
Oh yeah, please go for it.
I was going to say, super randomly, my book is 55% off on Amazon right now. And I don't know if it's because they're just trying to get rid of it or whatever, but I make no royalty ever with my book. So everyone should just buy it at half off. It would make me super happy.
And Franchesca, you should put the link in the chat for everybody. Yeah. So I want to stick with this. Rachel asked a wonderful question that I also had in my notes, sort of around what it means for like the future of the business model of publishers. And I want to make sure we get to that because that's really important. But I want to stick for a second with this sort of question around, right, if we're moving away from this sort of link-based sort of at least search responses towards something that's like, generated text. Right, there are these two issues. One, which Roger's question picked up on, was hallucinations, and one which you sort of ended with, Franchesca, which were data voids. I would love if any of you could sort of talk about how are these two things different, right? They could both lead to problematic outcomes, but how are they different, and what are the type of outcomes that we're worried about when it comes to search environment? And this is sort of open to any of you. And please ask each other questions, and let's make this as sort of conversational as possible. I would love to do as little moderation as possible.
I'll start with a little something, and then I'd love for people to pick up. So I feel like a data void in its most pure sense means when little to nothing exists about a subject. And so there's been this idea of like identifying data voids, but data voids are literal absences. And what we're actually much more concerned about are the rapid fills of voids. So it's less the void and more the like rapid fill around an identified void that is now actually full of content, but that the integrity or validity or trustworthiness of that content is where we're scrambling.
Yeah, Francesca's absolutely spot on for that description of data voids, which is different from like a hallucination. So just to stick to data voids in particular, one thing that we found to be a really cool way that folks have been filling the void actually is some folks, similar to Franchesca, but like Kate Starbird, for example, have found data voids and published articles on them. And the hope is that our systems can pick those up as high quality, or they are high quality, and then they'll kind of like float to the top. So that's kind of one example of a way that a void could get filled in a good way. And over time, the hope is as a void, or a term is originally new but becomes old over time, then more and more sources on the open web, high quality sources, will be publishing articles or pages on that topic. And that's another way that a void can get filled naturally over time. But it's a really interesting topic. I know we didn't talk much about hallucinations. I saw Roger's question, but want to offer the opportunity to stick more on voids for now.
Well, I think one thing might be helpful is actually to understand, I mean, so you gave a really fantastic overview of like what's sort of happening behind the hood or under the hood on like traditional search. But like with sort of AI augmented search, what's happening? I think, right, I think there are a lot of theories around what's happening, but I think it would be helpful to just sort of establish at like a sort of really, really simple level what's occurring there.
Yeah, so there are one thing that I should mention on AI. First of all, we should get crisp on what we mean by AI, because AI also means my robot vacuum. So if we're talking about generative AI in particular, even within that, there's a mental model of it being chatbots, I would say. Whereas generative AI can do a lot of different things. So I actually touched upon like how it's good for language understanding, like LLMs in particular. They're really, really, really getting good at understanding nuances in language and understanding how a sentence can change, as I mentioned, depending on where where a word is placed in a given sentence. So one is just like to use it for better language understanding. Another way is not for chat, which is more of a creative type of application, but summarization. So not all of these things are created equally, right? And so for chat, you may want to have more creativity and flexibility. Like if you're asking, write me a poem, write me a blog post, write me a tweet, that kind of thing. You can tune it for more creativity. Whereas for summarization, you can tune the model to say like more fidelity to the underlying sources and underlying documents. And so I don't think like the risk of hallucination is equal across all of these different use cases. And that's really important when we're thinking about different applications, whether we're talking about summarization, whether we're talking about something creative, whether we're talking about a customer service chatbot. There are lots of different applications. So for summarization, because there is more of an emphasis on the fidelity of the underlying sources, it really is, I would say, I think we should still consider the questions about data voids, the questions about what's available there to be summarized. But for hallucinations, it may be less of an issue because of the way that the models are trained, if that helps.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I want to turn to sort of Rachel's question, which was also one of mine. And Mia, maybe if we can start with you here, sort of around right. I mean, I think recently about Meta's move away from deprioritizing news, and it dropped sort of click-through rates to news publishers, and it was this sort of interesting moment where I think news publishers in many ways had rightfully sort of lamented the central role that Meta had played, and they rightfully lamented the fact that once they were deprioritized, they got fewer click-through rates. I think similar things are happening here, where right there were challenges for publishers with a sort of traditional search environment. And now perhaps there are going to be even tougher challenges with this new sort of AI augmented search environment that summarizes. So I'm curious sort of, whether you've been thinking about it, reporting it, both as a journalist, but also somebody who's at a publisher.
Yes, I think working in media means you are always worried about something. This is absolutely, a concern that has come up a ton, and I've also written quite a bit about it. But yeah, AI augmented search will have an enormous impact on publishers, not just Vox Media or The Verge, but also small blogs, small review sites, everyone who relies on Google traffic in some way. And in terms of, I think it's interesting because it's like for publishers, you can't opt out of it unless you also wipe yourself from Google search. And so there's a really big tension there about like what is the move? Do you, allow your work to be used in these summaries or in these the AI overviews, I think they're called now, or do you sort of withdraw from a platform that is probably driving most of your traffic? I suspect that we will see publishers, and I think actually we've already seen some of this, publishers trying to adjust to what they're staring, what's staring them down, trying to, sort of adjust their work the same way that they've historically tried to adjust it for a search results page. But I think that kind of digs them into a deeper hole, because you could be using that time to sort of be building something on your own that brings people to your website or your blog or your Facebook group, like whatever it may be, and keeps them there. And I think that that's something that actually we think about at The Verge a lot. What does it mean to build an audience? What does it mean to build something sustainable that keeps people coming back and keeps people paying for your work in whatever way that you've established? And I think that for a long time, not just on Google search, but on Facebook, definitely, on Twitter, like we've sort of over-indexed how much these platforms can do for us. And as we've done that, we have spent more and more time trying to adjust our work for those platforms instead of actually building something on our own. My boss, Nilay Patel, often calls The Verge the last website on earth, kind of as a joke, but to emphasize like how important theverge.com is for us. We want people to type in theverge.com and sit on our homepage. We want people to keep a tab open and refresh it throughout the day. And to me, that is a better use of our time than really trying to adjust our work for whatever changes platforms will present. And it's not just search, it's not just AI search on Google, it's all other platforms. I wrote a story earlier this week about how TikTok, which is now increasingly being used as a search engine by younger people especially, is also putting AI search results in their search pages. And it's ChatGPT generated work. So, it's like you can't run from this. You have to sort of confront it. And I think in the end, for big publishers and small, you need to think about what it is that you are providing and how can you get people to your work directly.
Zoe or Francesca, did you have anything to add? If not, there are a number of questions in Q&A. And just a reminder,
we can keep going with questions. I mean, I think I'd like to just highlight, I mean, the work of Jen Schrady, I think seems really relevant here, and the idea of the revolution that wasn't, right? What Mia's talking about is true for a lot of things in terms of money and power and ability to organize and utilize the tools to the best of your advantage, not just with creators of content and media content, but also political organizing. And TikTok has also started creating keyword suggestions, which seem extremely relevant, and that conspiracy theorists have a pretty phenomenal understanding of how to make their content accessible. And so I don't know, but what we can learn from them. But that would all I had. We can go to the next question.
Yeah, so there's a question from Evelyn, which I think sort of pushes us to think about a number of these topics sort of in a different context, which is that a lot of, right, I mean, this is true in my work, which is almost entirely sort of focused on like English language social media and English language search environments. However, obviously, like that's not the reality for most folks, that they're not using, search engines in English. And so I'm curious, in any of your work, whether you've sort of focused on other language communities, whether it's data voids, whether, it's thinking about content, the publishers, Mia or Zoe, obviously, you're focused on this at scale, how you think about sort of different languages and how these dynamics extend to those language communities.
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the exciting things about LLMs is that many of them come pre-trained on a lot of languages, and so it really is able to help us expand our understanding of quality and also our language understanding capabilities. So one of the models that we have is called MUM, the Multitask Unified Model. We're using that for things like better understanding help-seeking queries, right? And for things like suicide or domestic violence. And there are some unique types of ways in terms of phrase of how people in various languages would phrase some of these things, and traditionally our models may not have been as good at catching some of that nuance. And with LLMs, we're better able to do it. So a good example here is I want to end it. That's an English example, but we have others in other languages as well. Understanding that that's a help-seeking query and then being able to show hotline resources there, we're able to do that because of LLMs. And that's also been the case, not just in English and other languages. But I think also, we've really tried to support the ecosystem across the board. We do have Fact Check Explorer. You can use claim review markup in order to mark up a fact-checking article, and that'll be displayed directly in search in a snippet. And that's not just in English, that's in a lot of different languages. I think it is definitely an area where an ecosystem approach is super helpful. And yeah, I'd love to see more support for those who are doing the work of helping us better grapple with mis and disinformation, not just in English, but in other languages as well.
I'll point to the work of Moonshot. They are a pretty amazing team. Vidya, I had a chance to meet at an organization, but they're effectively looking at the relationship between queries that are potentially harmful, both to persons and to society, and thinking about how they can connect those information seekers to existing physical resources. And I believe that they're doing work in a multilingual capacity, or that's the goal. I know my own work, so I'm starting a lab here through CTAP and some of our Knight research funding. We just hired an amazing postdoc, that's Anna Beers, who is graduating from CIP, and their work is just incredible. And so we're bringing them on because a lot of the work that I'm interested in is how we can potentially look at the way platforms are interconnected and how these data voids spread across platforms. But part of this plan is to start in English, and then if we can create a semi-automated system for this, then combining it, looking in Spanish. And unfortunately, I've applied for so many grants in the last year that say just that, like we need more, specifically Spanish, and then obviously other languages. But if we're trying to target disinformation specific to election integrity and electoral outcomes in the future of democracy, the United States is one of the 5th largest countries of Spanish speakers. So we need to be studying this at the bare minimum in Spanish. And so if you're doing some of this work, I'd love to connect. So please let me know how to connect with you.
Yeah, so I'd like to turn sort of back to something that I think has been running through our conversation and that has also run through a couple of the unanswered questions we have here, which is sort of around trust and building trust, right? So there are these two different threads, and I'd like to open up to obviously all of you, which is the first is how do we sort of, right, if Google went from a place that like or search engines are going from ordering information, but you pick up on other sort of credibility or trust heuristics, right? Do I know the domain, to something different where, right, there's going to be summarization. So one question from Sam is what's the sort of pathway to building trust in this search environment? I think both, something that Mia was picking up on from publishers to be able to like give their content to be summarized, and then also from users to trust what they're seeing. And the second question is that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a broader context, and we're in the sort of year of elections, and we have rising we have eroding democratic institutions and norms and trust in democracy. And so I'm sort of curious in this moment of the way that propagandists in your work, Franchesca, sort of leverage trust in doing their own research to sort of build belief in conspiracy theories, how we sort of think about trust specifically in this moment of the sort of general backdrop, and then also changes in the technology.
Yeah, do you want me to start then? I feel like I just the last answer. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I saw an article that just came out with a graduate student in Ellis Marlick on this, doing your own research. And we think explicitly about the role of affordances. How do technological affordances kind of enable people to build trust in situations where necessarily they are not being trustworthy persons, if that makes sense. So doing your own research is a really fabulous example. We look at Google Scholar, Twitter, and Yandex to look at how various persons had enabled the affordance and activated it in order to instill trust in a lie, right? And so we unpack 3 different untruths and how they were able to really garner support and trust around these claims when the claims were in fact not true. And really a lot of this is embedded in this interaction with the technology, right? Or the affordance of the technology. So I would say a lot of the trust comes from this tangible do-it-yourself quality to not necessarily trusting one person or one thing. And we often think of do your own research as maybe a bad thing, but I think actually we can activate this IKEA effect, right? We can activate this do your own research in a really positive way by doing things like what Kate says this team's doing at CIP, but creating, if we know what these words are and create content around them, that's one way we can work within this framework of doing your own research, but kind of talking down to that idea of not doing your own research. It doesn't work because all of us do it. I mean, if you're not, clearly we're all researchers, obviously, most of the people on this team. So literally that's our job. But even among many people who are just interested in the inquiries of life, like that's going to be, this process of going through this is, I think, integral to creating trust. And so how can we get part of that? I feel like my answers are kind of all over the place today. So hopefully that was useful.
No, Francesca, I love that answer because I don't think we should necessarily demonize doing your own research, because done well and informed by, evidence-based practices and information literacy, it can be really powerful. And and Zeev knows that we've invested a lot here in helping users in a more frictionless and easy way do things like lateral reading through features like about this result, about this page, about this author, and now we have about this image. And so I think, taking the SIFT method or the core method and finding out ways to make that easier within the product, a product like search, is something that we're really deeply invested in trying to help with in a way that doesn't feel heavy-handed, but just feels easier and helpful for people. And so I'd encourage folks to check out. I always give a plug to Mike Caulfield's SIFT method as like kind of a good way to do your own research.
I wanted to just add really quickly that I did a piece, I think at this point, maybe about a year ago, about a group of publishers and websites that had been experimenting with having a chatbot that was trained only on their own work. So it was sort of like a question box that appeared on articles, and you could search their entire archive and ask it questions. And weirdly enough, like, I kind of did trust it because it often would return answers that said, sorry, I don't have enough information to answer this question. And I think that is something that you don't really see very much. And a lot of the marketing around AI tools is very centered on this magical quality, right? It's sort of just like poof, and this thing happens. And I actually am very interested in where these tools break down. And when you see sort of the cracks in the this magic, and when it says, sorry, I actually don't know, we don't have enough. And I will say also that, the one day I was testing it and I asked it something very simple, like when was the iPod introduced or something, and it like straightforwardly got that wrong. And I asked the developers about it, and then a few days later, that answer was no longer available, and then it had sort of reverted to like, sorry, I don't have enough information to answer it. So, I mean, I don't know that that says that it's trustworthy entirely, but I did appreciate that there was an acknowledgement of like, this tool can't do it all, and even when it can produce something, it's not always accurate, and you do need to check it every single time.
Yeah, I really like that sort of reframing as like humility from sort of AI products as being an important part of building trust. I also, Zoe, as you and I have talked, I used to be a high school literature teacher before I went to grad school, and media literacy is really fascinating because I remember, everything's changing so quickly that I was pretty well positioned to be able to help my students sort of think about, well, how do you go onto a traditional search environment? But then like I had no idea how do you quickly figure out credibility heuristics on TikTok or Instagram, right? And so it's changing so quickly that I really like thinking about sort of some of these as really decisions that need to be made at the product level, because we're not going to be able to sort of teach our way out of this in high schools, which I think too often is everyone's preferred solution. So we're roughly at time. I just want to thank everyone sort of here for coming today. I especially want to thank our three panelists. I found this endlessly fascinating. It was my favorite type of conversation where we had really sort of deep and complementary expertise. It was also probably like the best cited webinar that I've ever moderated. Eric, we should be sure to save the links and send them out to all of the attendees afterwards, because I just think this can be a really rich resource for folks who are thinking about a lot of these hard questions like so many of us are. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you, Zeev, for pulling this all together. Great
And
conversation.
thanks,
Thank
Eric.
you.
Thanks, Eric, for helping behind the scenes. So, all right, bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.